So greetings from Pennsylvania once again, and yes, it's finally time to do the Forbes campaign for our French and Indian War series, but we're only doing part one today. We're just doing it halfway. We're starting here in Carlisle and making our way out towards Bedford, Pennsylvania, which is in south central Pennsylvania. And at a later time, we'll do part two, which goes from Bedford out to Pittsburgh, where Fort Duquesne was actually located. So in a moment here, I'll show you on the map what the plan is for today. And this will be one of these videos where I'll be filming as I'm driving. I'll be talking with you about Forbes' campaign as we go along the path roughly that Forbes and his army took to make their way out to Fort Duquesne, or today out to Bedford, Pennsylvania, where Fort Bedford was, or it was originally called Fort Raystown. Let's look at the map first here, though. All right, so here is our Pennsylvania map. Of course, we are currently here in, where are we? We're here in Carlisle, here in Cumberland County. Of course, Fort Duquesne was all the way over here. It was today Pittsburgh, but let's say we're not making it all the way out there today. We're just going halfway to about right here, Bedford, Pennsylvania. So like I said, we're up here in Carlisle, and this is where the army kind of started. It's where everything kind of, the campaign started. And it made its way down this way. We'll be following roughly the path, going down 81 probably. And over here to Fort Loudon. And then they went up this way towards Fort Littleton. And then they made their way over here. There's a fort in here somewhere where they crossed the Juniata River. I think it's called Fort Juniata Crossing. And then they made their way over here towards what is today Bedford. Like I said, originally it was called Fort Raystown. Today it's referred to as Fort Bedford. So that's where we're going to head to towards today. And in a later video we'll make this journey out to Pittsburgh to Fort Duquesne. All right, so we're going to get this video going then. I'm going to head into town where Fort Carlisle was, right in the center of Carlisle. Actually, it's pretty busy in there. We filmed that last spring, and I'll tell you more about Forbes' campaign and the expedition as we drive along. Give you some more details of it. All right, but let's get going. All right, here we are in downtown Carlisle. Just up ahead is where Fort Carlisle itself is located, right in the center of what is today downtown Carlisle. Because obviously it didn't look like this back then. The summer of 1758. There's Bedford Street. It's kind of interesting because that's where we're headed, to the town of Bedford. Yeah, but here's where it all started. This was kind of like the staging ground for the campaign. This is where the troops initially came. This is where they headed out from. Of course, General Forbes, we did a video on him recently, was the one in charge of this campaign, the British general. And his second in command was Henry Bouquet. And of course we did a video on him as well. But Bouquet arrived here first. Forbes didn't come till later. Yeah, so if you were going to be a part of the Forbes campaign to head out to what is today western Pennsylvania to take Fort Duquesne, this is where you would have started. Because I doubt anybody here in Carlisle is actually thinking about that today. Everybody's got their own things they're thinking about. Like these people that went across. Alright, so we are headed out of Chambersburg, out here on Interstate 81. Headed south towards Chambersburg, and then to Fort Loudon. I can just get over. So as with Braddock's campaign back in 1755, Forbes and his army had to build a road out to Fort Duquesne. Of course, the question gets raised, why didn't they just use Braddock's road, which was already there? Because we talked a bit about that in the video that we did. I did a biography on Forbes. There was a big kind of a discussion about that, whether to use Braddock's road or to make a new road. I'll talk a little bit about that later. I know we covered that, I think, in a Forbes video. But there are reasons why he chose to go this way instead of use Braddock's road, like I said, which was already there. Because Braddock's road started down in Virginia, around Alexandria, Virginia, made its way up to Fort Cumberland in Maryland, and then up through southwestern Pennsylvania to the Pittsburgh area. But the route we're traveling now is still often called Forbes Road, but there already was an old wagon road here currently that led down to Fort Loudon. So he didn't have to build a road from Carlisle to Fort Loudon. There was one already there. Because when we say road, once again, you got to remember it wasn't a road like we're driving on today. It was a very rough, rocky, muddy wagon road that was very slow to traverse, especially with an army. Alright, so we're leaving Interstate 81, getting on Route 30. So we're going to head through Chambersburg on our way to Fort Loudon. And if we were in Forbes' army back in 1758, Fort Loudon would be our first major stopover. Yeah, as we crest this hill in front of us, you should be able to see the mountains in the distance where Fort Loudon is located. Because remember, it was on the frontier line back during the French and Indian War. Yeah, Forbes had about 6,000 men in his army altogether. Of course, he rarely had them all together at once. By the time the campaign started, where we are, headed out to Fort Loudon, some of the soldiers hadn't even arrived back at Fort Carlisle yet. I don't think some were even in Pennsylvania yet. They are kind of coming in at different times, but the campaign kept being delayed and delayed. He finally just had to start. Of course, Forbes himself, like I said earlier, didn't really travel with the advanced army. His second in command, Bouquet, went ahead of him. Yes, the when armies traveled on campaigns like this, they didn't travel in one big blob from one section to another. The whole army was just kind of strung out in a long line, over the miles. You had the advanced men, you had the supply chains. Like I said, you had some soldiers who hadn't even arrived yet back at the beginning. So they're all kind of strung out. So it wasn't as if there's 6,000 men all traveling in one big blob together down this road. It's not really the way it worked. And the army was quite a bit of a diverse army that he had. There's about about 6,000 altogether. About 2,000 of those troops were from Pennsylvania, provincial troops. About 1,400 were from Virginia under George Washington. Of course, the Pennsylvania troops were under Armstrong. We did a whole video on him, too. Yeah, the Virginian troops didn't become part of the campaign until I think about around where Fort Bedford is. It wouldn't have made sense for them to travel all the way to Fort Carlisle and then back west again. It wouldn't have made sense. So they joined later. There were about 150 troops from North Carolina, and then about 270 from Maryland. And of course, then the rest were all from England and Scotland. Some Royal Americans, about 350 Royal Americans, about 1,000 Highlanders, I believe those were the Scotlands, and then a group called the 62nd Foot, about 200, 300 men. So quite a diverse group of men came together under the leadership of Forbes for this campaign. You gotta understand too, there's a lot of sickness too. I think a lot of the men, even before they started the campaign were already sick. I think some of the North Carolina troops were sick from their journey just to get to Pennsylvania. So they had all kinds of issues with delays and sickness and just, yeah. That's the way those campaigns were. Yeah, up ahead you can see those mountains. Yeah, those mountains off to the right there you can see. Would have been a bit of a foreboding sign as a soldier coming this way. This is the route they would have taken. We're about 6 miles from Fort Loudon. But we're in the frontier right now. Once you go through those mountains, or past those mountains, you're in hostile territory. So far on this journey, you would have been relatively safe. You wouldn't have had to worry about attacks or things like that. There would be a number of settlers and pioneers in this area. Probably already some number of farms and things like that. But you know, once you see those mountains, the more perilous part of your journey is coming up. Because beyond those mountains was still considered Indian territory. Even though there were some settlers that had settled in those areas, it was still relatively unsettled. Yeah, there they are. You can see it off to your right there. And once again, that's why Fort Loudon was built just up ahead in this area, to protect this area from the Indian raids coming over those mountains. And then here's the road down to Fort Loudon, which is about 30 miles from Carlisle, so in some ways that was considered a long day's march. So once again, if you were in Forbes' army, in that, one of those troops, this fort would have been a welcome sight. Place to rest, stop marching for the day. Place of safety too. Yeah, I can see the stockade just up ahead. Of course, we've been here several times before already. This place is cool because it's not just the site of the fort, but they actually have a reproduction of what the fort actually looked like, so it looks pretty awesome here. You should be able to see it on the camera there now. Just up ahead. There she be, Fort Loudon. Yeah, so here we are at Fort Loudon once again. I love this area. I love seeing those mountains up there in the distance. Naomi likes it here too, but then just over there is the stockade. We'll take a closer look in a moment. They do have some information boards here, obviously. I've filmed these before in the past, but the part that applies to us mostly is, during the summer and fall of 1758, the fort served as a depot for supplies for the Forbes campaign and as a staging area for the British and provincial troops marching west. That's the part that concerns us here. Because they do have some other information, because as always, you can pause the video to read this stuff if you want to. This, like I said, I filmed this earlier other times, but here's another part of our story over here. The Cherokee Council at Fort Loudon. Yeah, from June 14th to 16th in 1758, some 200 warriors from the Cherokee and Catawba nations gathered here at Fort Loudon to meet with Colonel Henry Bouquet, second in command of the British and Colonial Army led by General Forbes, to consider a British request for an alliance against the French. And while Forbes' army was still preparing for the march west to capture Fort Duquesne. They spent quite a bit of time here preparing for the march west. Like I said, at this point they'd traveled on already established roads, but that's going to change in a little bit. Colonel Bouquet, through an interpreter named Anthony, tried to convince the Cherokee to join the campaign. For 2 days, talks were held at the summer house near the fort. That says what Bouquet observed about them. After 2 days of intrigue, dinners, and public councils, the Cherokee who were determined to leave, had changed their minds, and besides the 27 Catawbas, we had 99 Cherokees resolved to follow us everywhere you may want to lead us. So he was encouraged, but then down here says his confidence proved to be short-lived, for by mid-August most of the Cherokee had decided to return home. Some drawings of it here. Yeah, the British were pretty keen on having some of the Native Americans in the form of the Cherokees and Catawbas to be on their side during this campaign, because the French, obviously, it was the French and Indian War. The French had plenty of Native Americans on their side. The British wanted some as well, just to help be guides and scouts and things like that, to see what's going on ahead. I think they had a couple that did stay with them, but throughout the campaign, but not many at all. All right, let's head up to the fort here, check a look. But we'll just take a quick look again. I have filmed here several times before. It's a neat space, a neat spot. I think every summer they have a little festival here. Oh, they have one of the little swivel cannons out today. There's a cool one. When I was here, man, what was that? Was that last summer? They fired one of these off. You can see the little swivel cannon right up there. But yeah. Like I said, as a soldier marching his army, this would have been a welcome sight. I'll take you down to my favorite spot. at this location, because if I was a soldier marching that army, this is where I'd take my rest. It's down here. I love this spot. It's beautiful. I'd probably just want to stay here, not continue on the campaign. But yeah, absolutely beautiful. All right, but we can't stay here. And if we were a troop in that campaign, we wouldn't be able to stay here either. I'm not sure how long they got the rest, but we'd have to get going too. So, I should mention too that, you know, when Bouquet was here doing those, you know, meeting with the Cherokee and stuff like that, General Forbes is still, I think, back in Philadelphia yet, or maybe back in Carlisle at this time. Remember, he kind of stayed back. You gotta remember too, as I mentioned when I did biography on him, he was suffering from like stomach cancer or severe dysentery during the whole campaign. So he relied on Bouquet quite a bit to lead this expedition in many ways. All right, but we're going to continue on. I'm going to take a slight diversion from the path that they took. But once I get back up to Naomi, I'll show you the map, show you the change that I'm going to do. Well, from here they went up to Fort Littleton, which is another established fort here on the frontier. I'm going to take a slightly different route, take a little shortcut, just for the sake of time. We filmed Fort Littleton in the past. There's nothing there to see. There's just like a historical marker. We filmed that last spring. So I'm going to take a slightly different route to get to. We're going to be heading to Breezewood, what's today known as Breezewood, near where the next fort is going to be that I'm going to stop at. They, like I said, they would stop at Fort Littleton next, but we're going to skip that and go on to the next one. The fort at Juniata Crossing, it's called, where they cross the Juniata River. All right, but we got to say goodbye to this beautiful spot. Our commanding officer is yelling at me to get back up to the fort. It's time to march onwards. All right. There's a cool view of the fort from down here too. Of course, I guess this is a reproduction. This is not the original fort. This is what kind of get a good idea what it would have looked like in the past. And here's our map once again. Of course, we started here in Carlisle, just made our way down to this area to Fort Loudon, which is quite a march. Then from here, they marched up this way towards Fort Littleton, which is right up in here. And then they made their way over to what is today Breezewood, Pennsylvania, or the fort we're going to head to is called the Fort Juniata Crossing. But instead of going up here, I'm just going to take Route 30 this way, skip that little section. So they would have gone to, like I said, to Fort Littleton first, and then gone this way. But we're going to, like I said, take a little shortcut. And then from there we would head over to Fort Bedford. Should mention too that George Washington and his Virginia troops didn't join till later. They were stationed down here at Fort Cumberland. So they, up here is Fort Bedford. So they, once the main army got to Fort Bedford, then they came up to join. It would have made sense for Washington to come all the way over here to Carlisle and then march way over here. So he didn't join the campaign till they got to this area right here. All right, so time to say goodbye to Fort Loudon. So now we head into, hostile territory. Like with Fort Carlisle to Fort Loudon here, there was an established road from, well, maybe I shouldn't say road, but an established trail from Fort Loudon to Fort Littleton. So they didn't have to build a whole new road per se. They did have to make improvements to it though. A lot of times the existing roads or wagon roads were not really designed for an army to pass along through. I should mention too that even past Fort Littleton there was a road that had been made earlier, often called the Bird Road, B-U-R-D, which was made during the Braddock's campaign. It was a supply road that was going to bring supplies from this area of Pennsylvania to Braddock's campaign. That really didn't end up being used that much because Braddock got defeated at the Battle of Monongahela, but the road was still there, so they did use, Forbes' campaign did use parts of that road. There are quite a bit of differences, though, between Braddock's road and Forbes' road. They weren't built the same way. I'll talk about that a little bit later, too, I think. All right, but we get back up to Route 30. Like I said, we're going to skip Fort Littleton just for the sake of time and make our way to Breezewood, Breezewood over in Bedford County to the area of the fort at Juniata Crossing. And once again, you can see those mountains in front of us. That's the boundary of the frontier. Yeah, at this point, we should talk about, why didn't General Forbes decide to use Braddock's Road? I mean, some of it was probably just psychological. Braddock's Road ended in utter defeat, so to take a whole other army along that same road might have, I don't know, had some negative feelings about it. But there were reasons. Both at this time, of course, in modern times, Pittsburgh, where Fort Duquesne was located, is part of western Pennsylvania. But back in the 1750s, both Pennsylvania and Virginia claimed that area as their own. Even Maryland, the state of Maryland, claimed some of that area as its own. So it was kind of, all three were kind of claiming that area. Oh, we got green light. So Washington, like we said when I did the biography on Forbes, Washington was insistent upon using Braddock's Road, because Braddock's Road, like I said, started in Virginia. So if the British were able to take Fort Duquesne and settle that area, it would allow, settlers from Virginia to travel to that area easily and settle the area. And, depending on who was settling the area, they had a larger claim to the area. But if the road started in eastern Pennsylvania and made its way over, then you would have people from Pennsylvania settling that area, and then Pennsylvania would have a better claim to the territory. And that is what ended up happening then. Of course, Forbes did start the road in Pennsylvania, eastern Pennsylvania, and then after the war, people from eastern Pennsylvania used that road to settle the area around Fort Duquesne, giving Pennsylvania a better claim. Man, look at the mountains up ahead. We got some color out this way. Got some yellows and some reds up there. It's not this colorful back home yet. Wow. That's pretty awesome. Almost forgot what I'm talking about. But anyway, but Forbes had other reasons too for starting in Pennsylvania for the road. Eastern Pennsylvania was very rich in agriculture and horses and things like that, supplies that would be needed for his campaign. So he decided to start the road in Carlisle, there in eastern Pennsylvania, for that purpose. Like I said, there was lots of farms in the area, so there'd be plenty of grains to send out for supplies, plenty of horses. They needed lots of horses for the campaign. So that's why he chose to start it in Pennsylvania. And perhaps too, because he was getting tired of Washington. Washington kept writing him letters telling him to use Braddock's Road, and researchers think that Forbes got a little bit tired of that too. It may have slightly influenced him to not use Braddock's Road as well. And now we're heading down the mountain. Just crested it a little while ago. Because back that way was the overlook. What's it called? Big Mountain Overlook? I've taken you there before. But this is also why the Forbes campaign did not take this route. When you're making a new road like that into the wilderness, you want to try and avoid mountains. There's mountains up that way too, but the trails leading up to Fort Littleton and beyond followed old Indian paths that kind of used gaps in the mountains and stuff, make it a little easier. Trying to build roads back in those days over mountains. I mean, even today it's kind of difficult. Even if I see all these little turns you're making on this road. Yeah, so even though there was a lot of supplies in eastern Pennsylvania, it was still difficult to get what they needed sometimes. Like they need a lot of horses. So they would buy them from the farmers and stuff. But the farmers weren't necessarily willing to give their best horses because they wanted to keep those for their farm. So they'd sell, their older horses, their worn out horses to the British instead. And the commanders complained about that a lot because those old horses had trouble getting, carrying those, not carrying, but pulling those supply wagons and stuff. They're just all kind of old and weak. They're always needing new horses. And there were a number of other differences too between Braddock's Road and Forbes Road. They had learned from Braddock's expedition quite a bit, actually. I mean, that, as you know, that ended in failure, so they did change some things. But Braddock's Road is rather narrow. We filmed sections of that. It was just wide enough for, troops and wagons to pass by. And Braddock didn't build forts along the way. So during Forbes' campaign, they made the road a lot wider, probably almost quite as wide as this is, which was good in some ways. We'll talk about that in a moment, but Braddock could move a lot faster because his road was smaller, more narrow, allowed him to move faster, but building a wider road would slow you down. That's what happened with the Forbes campaign. It kept slowing down. Didn't get out to Fort Duquesne till November 24th, I believe, or 25th, which is pretty late in the season for what they wanted. They didn't want to be out there during the winter. They weren't really prepared for that. But on either side of the main road, Forbes also had two little smaller roads, almost like footpaths built, paralleling each side of the road. You might ask, why would you do that? But that would allow troop movement. So if the main route, like we're on right now, is filled with supply wagons, if you have troops coming up from behind that wanted to pass, or troops coming up from ahead trying to come the other way, those other footpaths allow the troops to pass by. Otherwise, you just have a big traffic jam, big headache. So it's about allowing easier travel for traffic, I guess you could say. What back then was traffic. So if you're going up a mountain and the wagons are slowing down and bogging down, the troops could still move past them. Or like I said, if troops were coming the other way, they wouldn't be like a big traffic jam in the middle of the road. So probably a better way of doing it, but also a lot slower way of doing that. Alright, so we're only about 12 miles from Breezewood. And the next fort is just past Breezewood, where Route 30 goes over the Juniata River, or what's known as the Raystown branch of the Juniata River. But the fort itself was a bit north of where Route 30 crosses today. We'll try to get as close as we can. I think there's a road that takes you close to that area, but I'm not sure how far we'll be able to get on that road. I forget what it's called offhand. There might be a historical sign too on Route 30 itself. But in Breezewood, I'm going to film, there's two covered bridges just south of town that I'm going to film. So I'll be doing that in a little bit as well. Obviously separate from this video. And also, a lot of you know in Breezewood is where the abandoned Pennsylvania Turnpike tunnels are. We're not going to visit them today. I've been there a number of times in the past. Alright, but I'll check back in with you after I film those two covered bridges. And we start getting across the Juniata River. So we are leaving Breezewood. Just got done filming two covered bridges. Like I said, Jackson's Mill and Felton's Mill. And just up ahead is the Raystown branch of the Juniata River, where Route 30 crosses it. But the fort at Juniata Crossing was just a little bit north of there. Like I said, we'll try and find the road. Think of the name of it here. It's called a Niena Road or something like that. We'll see. I don't remember seeing a historical marker up here too. I accidentally came up this way earlier trying to find a road to the covered bridges, and I went a little too far. But once you get on roads like this, you can't really, there's no place to turn around sometimes for a while. I think down at the bottom of this hill is where the bridge is. We'll see if there's room to pull over at this spot though, along Route 30. The bridge should be coming up. Yeah, right here it is. I'll pull over right here, I think. Yeah, so right up there is the bridge, the modern bridge, Route 30. But like I said, you can't really see the river from here. But up that way about a mile is where the fort at Juniata Crossing was located. Like I said, I'll try to find there's a road that should go off to our right that should take us back that way. Lots of traffic here, sorry about that, but we'll see. We'll see what happens. Sometimes things don't always work out so well, but we'll do what we can. All right, so we're gonna cross the modern day bridge. Let's see if we can find that road. It probably won't be labeled. But back where the fort was, is also where the older bridge was. They built a bridge there back like in 1790 then. Let's see if we can find this road. Alright, well I think we messed that up. I did see what looked like a private lane heading off to the right. It wasn't labeled or anything, so that may have been the road I needed. But anyway, we'll have to let it go. Even from looking at Google Maps, I don't think the road went right to the river. It was all private property back there anyway, but I thought I'd at least give it a try, but oh well. And that brings us to another difference between Braddock's Road and Forbes Road. You know, Braddock didn't build forts along his route. Forbes did. Forbes did. So every 30 miles or so, or roughly speaking, they built a fort. Just as another way of defending the supply routes and defending the soldiers and stuff like that. And that's what one of those forts was, the fort at Juniata Crossing. Since it was a major crossing, they decided to build a fort there. I think there was a fort on either side of the river, but the one on the west side was much larger. The one on the right was just kind of like a maybe a storehouse or some supplies and stuff, I think more. But the one on the west side of the river was more of like your typical fort with the bastions on each corner and things like that. Alright, but we're heading to the next one. What today is called Fort Bedford. Like I said, back then it was initially referred to as Fort Raystown, or the camp at Raystown. And at this point we are back on roughly what is Forbes Road. Once I got to Breezewood, I'm kind of back on the original route, roughly speaking, from that little shortcut I took. Alright, got probably about 10-15 minutes to Bedford. And just as a side note too, even if we had gotten to the site roughly of that fort at Juniata Crossings, there's nothing there. They don't even know exactly where the fort was. I think there's some old bridge piers or abutments from the old bridge that was there, but all signs of the fort are gone. And there was a fort there later during the Revolutionary War too, but there's no remnants of that left either. So just as an aside, even if we had gotten to that location, there would really have been nothing to see. But it still would have been nice to at least be at the location. But that's the way it is sometimes. Alright, about 6 miles to Bedford. Alright, so we are heading into Bedford. Of course, if you were a weary soldier on the march, this would be a relief for you. You're almost at there. Unless you were one of the first soldiers here, then you were responsible for building the fort. If you came later, then the fort would have already been here. Then it would have been a relief, but the first ones that arrived here had to actually build the fort. I guess we'll go this way. Looking for Juniata Street. Yeah, and Fort Bedford was then... Oh, there's this Bedford Village there. Gotta pay attention and talk. It was a major staging area then for the second part of this campaign. They stayed here for quite a while. They did a lot of troop training here at Bedford, getting them ready to possibly fight the French and the Indians, who fought differently. They learned from Braddock's campaign. You remember that defeat? Braddock was trying to fight in like the old European style, I guess you'd say. Instead of fighting like the French and Indians did, the Indian style warfare they called it. We dealt with that in other videos though. So they're trying to train the troops to fight differently, to fight in that style. It's just a point too of waiting for the rest of the troops to show up, because remember I said the troops didn't all march all together in one big blob. The ones that got here first built the fort. Then the rest kept trickling in, and eventually Washington and his troops came too. And then from there they continued on. Or I got paid. Okay, I think up here is business 220, so I think just past this intersection up here. Yeah, just on the corner there. I don't know if you can see that historical sign for Fraser Tavern, site of lots on which John Fraser and his wife established an inn and trading post in 1758. Fraser had been a guide and interpreter for Colonel Washington, then provided meals for any officers at Fort Raystown or Fort Bedford. Cool. Yeah, I can see it just off to your right there. All right, so there's a little piece of history. That little stone building on the corner of the video there, built in 1758, or at least parts of it. Maybe it was, redone at some point. But yeah, that's part of our history right there for this video. Cool. As I'm waiting for the light to turn green again, just looked over and there it was. All right, cool. All right, here's Juniata Street, or Juliana. I guess that's what I want. Is it? It goes down to the river. Yeah, I think this is the site. The Fort Bedford Museum's off to my right there. Hey, right there's a historical sign for it. Cool, yeah, so here we are. Fort Bedford, or Fort Raystown as it used to be called. Not sure if the museum's open though. Alright, so we made it to Fort Raystown. Yeah, sorry to confuse you, but it was originally called Fort Raystown. Later on it's changed to Fort Bedford. Let's read the historical sign first. Right there's the museum. Not sure if it's... Oh, let's just say it's open. We might check it out then in a moment. But yeah, first known as Raystown and built during the summer of 1758 by the forces of Colonel Henry Bouquet. The fort was the rendezvous from which the expedition of General Forbes advanced to occupy Fort Duquesne. Museum stands on the original site. So I had read in one article that they don't know where the original site was, but the museum is claiming that it's on the original site, I guess. Yeah, right here by the Juniata River. Take a look. Yeah, one article referred to this fort as the Grand Central Station for the campaign. It's like I said, this is kind of the rendezvous point for all the troops that were arriving from eastern Pennsylvania and then from Fort Cumberland, Washington's troops. Kind of like the staging area for the second half of the campaign. So it's an important spot. They have like a rail trail here too, or just the it's a water trail. The Raystown branch of the Juniata. Of course, it would have looked a ton different back in the day. This would have all been wilderness, kind of like what you see up in the mountains up there. And up there's the museum. Let's see if it's open, if we get to pay anything. Not sure if I'm allowed to film in there or not either.
It's nice that they're interested.
Alright, so
Turn this thing.
alright, so this is Joe.
Turn this down. Oh, it's off.
I'll show you the most interesting thing I found metal detecting on the road. I was a teacher for 37
Oh, wow.
years in Bedford, and then I retired. And I've been doing metal detecting then for about 20 years. And I traced Forbes Road.
Okay.
Even through the forest.
All right, yeah.
And did metal detecting on the road. And this was the most interesting thing I found.
Oh, wow.
When they were cutting the road east of here. Do you know where Breezewood is?
Yeah, that's how I just came through there.
When they got to Breezewood cutting the road, they had to cross this river down here.
Yeah.
And this is the Raystown branch of the Juniata.
Yeah.
So they put a little fort up there and named it Raystown, or Fort Juniata.
Right.
Raystown. And it was near there where I found this silver coin, among the other things that I discovered while metal detector.
Wow.
Here's the same coin in my hand, and it was a Spanish real. The date on it, 1721.
Wow.
And actually, I just found it here in this. I just dug it out of this hole right here. That's my metal detector, and then it's the front and back of the coin. I found a lot of stuff on Forbes Road, and I donated everything
To the
the
museum.
museum
Wow.
here. In fact, I can show you this coin. There is the coin.
Oh, that's the one you were showing in the picture?
Yep.
Oh, wow.
And here's a picture of it back here, but my picture's a little bit better than
Right.
what they have.
Huh.
And it didn't deteriorate because it was silver.
Right.
These were other British coins I found. They were copper and brass. They're all smooth. You can't
Right.
read anything on them because they deteriorated. And I, of course, found that padlock and then these items over here. Those big spikes, like that one, was used to hold metal clamps, how they put the metal clamp around the wheel.
Right.
And that was the kind of spike they used. Those are gun parts back there. I didn't find these cannonballs, but these were
Okay.
found near here by other people. Some people found them in their gardens.
Oh, wow.
And donated them. I did find broken buckles, and there's a badge, and a thimble, button. This glassware and other things there, I didn't find that. But we had an archaeologist come in and do an excavation at where one of the walls of the fort was.
Okay.
So she found some of that glass stuff. No, and those are things I found back there.
Oh, like these, oh, like the horseshoes and stuff.
Yes, I found lots of horseshoes. Probably, oh man, I'd say maybe 50 or 60
Oh, wow.
horseshoes. Many of them broken. And that hook, I found a number of those. That's what soldiers would use to hang pots over fires
Oh, yeah.
when they were out on their own.
Right.
And, had to cook their own meals. So there's horseshoes there, and that's a oxen shoe. And then the nails and spikes. They were all made one at a time by blacksmiths. And this was a portable device for blacksmiths.
Right.
And of course, they made things like that.
There's a lot of history in here. There's some of the history of the Indians. Got some arrowheads. I'm not gonna stop and show you everything. I'll be here, be a 3-hour video, but we need to go looking for arrowheads again sometime soon too. Wow. A lot of stuff here. A lot of tools. Oh, there's one of those things that they use for grinding corn. Wow. Just a ton of stuff. Alright. Like I said, I can't show all of it. What is this one? Oh, the wounding of General Braddock. There he is right there. Yeah, check out this map. This is the way we came. We started over there in Carlisle. Chambersburg right down here is Fort Loudon. And over here, Raystown. And we're trying to get to, in the next video, of course, we'll get over to Fort Duquesne over there. And here's the one map that Joe showed me. Here's the fort itself. But most of the soldiers, he pointed out, lived in like other encampments along the, this is Forbes Road right here. So that's kind of cool. And of course they have the model of the fort right here. my shadow in the way. Alright, so that worked out really well. Not only was the museum open, but that Joe was in, I forget his last name again, but he, like I say, he was a school teacher for 30 years. He's done a ton of history on the whole French and Indian War. He does whole seminars and stuff, so that was pretty interesting. Yes, that worked out. Actually worked out great listening to him and just walking around there. Alright, but I think that'll be it for our video. We made it here to Fort Loudon. Now I gotta make the journey home. I'm gonna visit one more spot here in town though, one more covered bridge. But on part 2, which I'm not doing today, I'm not sure when I'll do that video yet, but we will start here in Fort Loudon, here in Bedford, Pennsylvania, and make our way to Fort Duquesne and finish the second half of this Forbes campaign. And as always, in all my historical videos, if you want to learn more about the details of stuff, you can always do your own research. I just kind of give an overview of these things. All right, as always, thanks for coming along, and we'll see you on the next one.